And that's really what your book is about to some degree,
Yeah.
is developing yourself within and the benefit it has for everyone around you.
Yes, you're exactly right. And the way that I set up the book was very intentional. So, we often hear that like leaders, their job is to lead other people. Um, but if I've learned anything, over the course of my career, it's that you have to lead yourself first
Yeah.
before anyone else will follow you. And if you're not doing a good job leading yourself first, you probably won't have any followers. And so the book is really set up to help you, first of all, learn how to lead yourself.
Jennifer Nash is the author of Be Human, Lead Human. The book is a compilation of research and relatable stories that help leaders understand and implement behaviors that make their teams feel appreciated and connected. And it all grew out of an experience that Jennifer had, an aha moment that sent her life on its current course. Join us for a fascinating discussion about the importance of recognizing human, being human, and leading human. Jennifer, welcome to Bump in the Road. If you would, tell us your story.
Thank you so much for having me, Pat. I'm excited to be here. So my story, I grew up in the Midwest, and I came from a very modest background. I put myself through school, and I started working, like most of us do. And I got to a point in my career where I was working for a particular leader in an organization, and it was the first time in my career of 16 years of working that I actually felt seen as a human being. And it really changed the trajectory of my life. And so it prompted me to go back to school and answer the question of why don't we have more leaders who help people feel seen and heard and understood and valued, not just for the work output that they can create, but for who they are as a human being. That was so important to me. And so I went back, I did my MBA, I did my PhD, and I learned a lot about, why we are in this place of leaders that don't help people feel seen and heard. And so I started a consulting business to help leaders get better at that. And then all of the advice and guidance that I kept finding myself giving to clients because they were asking for that, it culminated in the book that you see behind me, which is called Be Human, Lead Human: How to Connect People in Performance. So I couldn't coach everybody at the same time, but what I could do is give them all of my thinking in one place. And so that was my impetus to write the book, and start to help change the world in a small way.
Tell us a little bit about the book.
Yeah, so Be Human, Lead Human is set up in different chapters. Each chapter starts with a story that people can relate to, and then it pulls different tools and actions and behaviors out of that story to help people see what is it that they might be experiencing or exhibiting as well, and then what are some of the actions and tools that they can use to overcome those behaviors. So, for example, I was working with a client last week, and they were telling me how they have two people in their organization who are just fighting with each other, right? They're not playing nicely in the sandbox, and they keep throwing people under the bus that are in their team. And so this person was really frustrated. She's like, how do I get these people to understand that, like, this isn't the type of culture that we want to have here? We collaborate, we communicate, we have each other's backs. And, clearly these two people weren't understanding that that is what the expected behaviors were. And so we had conversation around communicating what the expectations are, being clear about the expected behaviors, and then understanding what it is that are the outcome of those behaviors. And so the book talks about each of those things in different ways, and it uses a framework called the humans framework that leaders can use to put in their toolkit and lead people effectively.
That's really hard when you in that example where you have people fighting. And
Yeah.
I think in a competitive environment, some degree of infighting is almost inevitable. I mean,
Mhm,
I look back, I had a lawyer steal a database from me. I had somebody who sat on 2 publicly traded corporate boards steal intellectual property. I
mhm.
mean, how do you get people attuned to the human side of things?
I think, so for this particular example, it was a STEM type of environment. And so they were trained to be looking at things from a scientific perspective and from a data perspective. So the human element, interestingly, didn't really factor into that, even though they were in a helping profession. And so taking a step back and reminding the people, this is why we're here. This is why we do what we do. Aligning that purpose and those motivators for why they went into that work in the first place, and then creating a culture that reflects that was integral to helping this person change what's going on in the organization.
That's so interesting that in a human-oriented business, the humanity isn't there.
I know, right? And it's interesting because I would wonder, do these people handle their patients the same way?
Oh,
Are they
yes.
doing that with them? Because we know from behavior standpoint, behaviors don't change, right? People are they're pretty consistent with their behavior. They're going to demonstrate it at work, they're going to demonstrate it at home. There's no difference.
Agree, absolutely.
So it's always, I think, it started a little bit with Taylor when Taylor was looking at optimizing efficiency for processes, right? He was a mechanical engineer. He's known as the father of scientific management, and he was one of the first management consultants. And so he took a pig iron worker and he decided to figure out the most optimal way to help this pig iron worker do their job. Now, this pig iron worker had been doing their job just fine before Taylor came along, right? They'd figured out their own processes, their own tools, how they wanted to get the work done in the best way that worked for them, and everything was fine. But Taylor came along and decided he wanted to do that better. Now, his heart was in the right place because he wanted to optimize profits for the organization and he wanted to optimize income for the worker. But the way that he went about it, he started micromanaging. He told them how much actual weight of pig iron to pick up. He told them how many steps to take. And then he told them when to set that down. And then he told the worker when to sit down and for how many seconds the worker would sit down. And then when they had to get up and take another number of steps back and start the process all over again. So interestingly enough, right, he did optimize the process, but in doing that, he removed the human element from the equation. And that is something that we are still dealing with today, 100 years later.
Well, and he also removed the, individual's ownership in the product that he was producing.
Exactly. Exactly. And so when you look at the workplace today, what you see is leaders who are leading with these micromanaging techniques and these ways of telling people what to do. And that completely takes away the ownership, from the person who's doing the work. It takes away their voice, it takes away their autonomy. And those are some significant drivers, motivational drivers that we need to feel like we have meaning and purpose in what we are doing.
Meaning and purpose are so important, and I think you bring that up when you say you felt unseen for 16 years.
Mhm,
I don't think you're at all atypical in that,
mhm.
um, and that's a terrible state of affairs.
Right? Right. And when you think about like what it takes to have someone feel seen and feel heard and have their voice heard and feel understood, it doesn't take a lot. It doesn't take a lot of time. It doesn't take any money. It just simply takes you having the natural innate curiosity to say, "Tell me more about that." Or, "What's your perspective on that? I feel like we have a difference in how we're thinking about this. I'd love to learn more about your perspective." Just simply asking a question and using inquiry. And I talk about that, as one of the tools in my book. Help people feel heard requires some curiosity on your part.
You've touched upon one of my favorite topics, curiosity,
Yeah.
because I think that between people, I don't know if it's just a sign of the times or what, but we
Mhm.
really lack curiosity. We don't ask anything about people, and I think that it's not a very human way to connect. One of the things you wrote in your book I thought was terrific. You wrote, "When we don't connect with each other as human beings, we're in grave danger of losing our humanity. We
Yeah.
risk losing empathy and gaining apathy. We risk decreasing social connection and increasing loneliness. We risk enjoying togetherness and augmenting division.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah, if you look at, our rates of loneliness are just skyrocketing, right? Technology is bringing us closer together, but we're still divided through screens. And if you've ever watched, use this as an example. If you go out to dinner and you watch a family at a table, or you watch people at another table, most of the time now, you're going to see everyone heads down, fingers tapping.
Yeah.
There will very rarely be any type of conversation, let alone dialogue or intellectual debate going on. There's most generally screens, typing, or people are scrolling social media. When the food comes, they start to eat, but they keep one hand on the phone and they're still looking at it while they're eating. Um, it's striking to me how we have so much. I use this quote in the book, and I can't remember the author right now, but it was from the poet Elizabeth, around how we have so much to share with one another, and we have so many different perspectives and beautiful pieces to ourselves. How can we not be of interest to one another? And yet we we prefer the phone and scrolling to having those in-person conversations anymore.
It
Um,
it absolutely amazes me. Of course, I'm curious about everybody, so
mhm.
I kind of come at it from a different perspective, but one of the things I find very interesting, people never ask a question of me. Now,
Right,
the podcast isn't the place to do that, okay?
right,
But I just mean in general,
yeah.
um, I've had such an interesting, really extraordinary life, and people don't show any curiosity, even after you start prompting them with, "Oh, that's really interesting. Where were you when that happened? What did you do?" You can pepper them with, um, opening questions,
Right.
and it doesn't come back.
No, no. When I'm working with clients who are more on the introverted side of the spectrum, I tell them, look, the secret to this is that most people love to talk about themselves. They will rarely ask you a question. So if you're not comfortable talking about yourself, you can just demonstrate curiosity and your natural innate talents of being an introvert and ask people all these questions that you have, right? Because you have this, really active life going on inside your head, and people just don't realize that. And sometimes they take it for being, disengaged, or they take it for being disinterested when, you're processing everything that's happening, and then you have more questions. Um, and for the introverts, we love, extroverts because they give us that space to sort of capture our thinking and capture our thoughts, and then when we're ready to share it, we can do that. But we also like to ask them questions, right? And so we're not in a space where it's really awkward and uncomfortable if we don't know what to say or we're not comfortable talking about ourselves. But I'm with you. I consistently, my mom said I started asking questions when I was 2 years old, and I haven't stopped. And so, the 5 W's are like, who, what, where, when, why, how, and, all of that. Like, those are some of the favorite ways to start a conversation. And it's
Oh,
so easy that way. Yeah.
they're fascinating. What
Yeah.
you created kind of a process for starting to open that human connection.
Mhm.
And it involves several steps. The first one is hearing. What is hearing about?
So, hearing is about not just the physiological act of hearing someone's words, come into your ear and make it to your brain. It's also about the figurative aspect of hearing someone, right? Like sometimes I was just watching one of the episodes of Your Honor last night on Netflix.
Netflix or Amazon, it's on one or the
Yep.
other, yeah.
Yep. And so the scene is where, this guy was dying, and the person is saying, like, I got you, right? Like, I'm here. I hear you. I'm here for you. Like, so in that sense of like, I'm here to support you. I want to give you that comfort or that compassion or whatever it is. Like, we say, oh, I hear you, right? I got you. Like, it's sort of like that figurative hearing, right? I'm in the space of understanding with you, and I support you. So there's
That's
multiple levels to the hearing, what that means.
go into that a little bit because I think hearing, when you really hear somebody, it's partly energetic.
Yes, exactly. So, I talk about the fact that it's not just physiological. there's a component to hearing that involves the energy. It involves what's not said. It involves what is said. It involves like the verbal, the vocal, the nonverbals,
Mhm.
everything that's happening when you are interacting with that person. You're hearing what they're saying, what they're not saying, the energy they feel sometimes in a way that you hear the energy, you feel it um, in the conversation. And so it happens on many different levels. And I talk about that in the book with what's called the degrees of listening tool.
The next step is understanding.
Mhm. Yes. So, understanding is not just hearing the words that are said, but understanding the perspective behind that and what is meant by that. And it's also understanding what is not said. So, if I give the example of, um, um, a spouse, two
Mhm.
spouses, and they're talking, and the one spouse says, "Oh, like, let's go visit, my parents for the weekend." And the other spouse says, "Oh, that'd be great," right? With a very flat tone, like, "Oh, that'd be great." And there's no smile on their face and there's no energy in their voice, right? And so you're getting a mixed message. And so the person who's hearing that has to understand that what's not being said is actually more important than what was said, right? There's a flat affect of emotion on the face, but the words that came out of the mouth were, "Oh yeah, that'd be great." That doesn't match, right? There's a disconnect there.
There's a
Uh,
big disconnect.
yeah, a huge disconnect. And what we know from research is that typically when someone has a negative emotion, they express it non-verbally. And so if you're not listening for that, if you're not understanding that there is a disconnect there, you're going to miss a lot of those signals. And that causes some, disconnect and miscommunication.
That's an interesting point, and you're so right about that because most people inherently want to avoid conflict.
Yes, 100%. Yes.
Your next step is mattering, and that goes back to what we were talking about earlier, is everyone needs to matter. I mean, everyone needs to feel like they're seen and that
Yes.
they have some input into things.
Yes, exactly. And mattering, it's so when you think about mattering, it falls, up towards the top of the Maslow's hierarchy, right? It's really around making sure that we understand that our existence here on this earth matters to someone, that we matter, that we have meaning. Um, and so when you know that you matter to someone, that can give you purpose and that can give you a reason for staying, right? There was an example of um, a high school shooter in Michigan a couple years ago, and he had written on, pieces of paper that were later found, you know, my life doesn't matter. He had a sense that nobody cared about him, and
Yeah.
that it didn't matter if he was alive or dead. Um, and so when you're looking at that basic level of feeling that you matter, it's critical. And mattering at home and mattering at work, they're both important. And so um, the mattering piece of the framework is critically important to helping people understand how they fit into the community, where they belong, right? Do they feel that they are part of a community, part of something bigger than themselves?
Well, I think finding purpose, which also helps you fit into a community when you have purpose,
Mhm.
is one of the most fundamental needs that people have. And I think that if you don't have purpose, you don't feel that you matter, where
Mhm.
are you? I remember reading a story, I don't remember where I read this. It was about a gentleman who had some sort of terminal illness,
Mhm.
and he was just very depressed. And he, had talked, I guess, to some sort of minister or something, and the minister saw that he absolutely lacked any purpose in his life,
Yeah.
whatever was left of it, and he gave him odd jobs around the church, and he would all of a
Mhm.
sudden start finding things to do and
Yeah.
participate and whatnot, and he lived far longer than anybody ever expected.
Yeah. Yeah. When someone has a purpose or a meaning to get up in the morning, right? It's that mattering, the perception that we're a significant part of that world around us and that we have value in what we contribute to the world as well as to our own humanity. It's so important for people, especially, have you ever noticed like when people retire, there's typically people, a lot of people tend to die when they
Yeah.
retire because they lose that mattering. They lose what their purpose is and they don't know how to find a new one. And it
Well,
really sets them off course.
it can really upset their identity because often
Mhm.
their identity is either a title, a job, or a collection of material things.
Yeah,
And ultimately, that is not a sustainable identity.
right.
So I think retirement's one of those difficult pivotal points that people have to navigate. And I think you're absolutely right that you finding a new purpose
Yeah,
is critical to having just a meaningful life.
yeah, yeah.
And appreciation matters too. You mentioned that as well.
Mhm.
It is wonderful to feel appreciated.
Yes. Appreciation is so important, and a lot of the research that I did for the book, I would find that, there were a lot of people that I interviewed that said, well, people are getting paid, right? They're getting their paycheck. So why should I have to do anything else other than pay them, right? They should know that they're appreciated because they're still here, they're not fired, they're getting their job done. But when you look at it that way and you think about, this appreciation, people want to know that what they do matters. They want to know that their contributions are not only appreciated, but they're valued. And so, part of the framework for appreciating is helping people feel appreciated and then making sure that they receive that appreciation in a way that works best for them, right? Not necessarily how it works for you. You may feel that like their salary is sufficient, but when you ask them what makes them feel appreciated, people will tell you. Some people might want a public gesture of appreciation, right? Maybe they want to be called out or shouted out during a town hall. Other people may want a very private gesture of recognition, which is maybe just a quick conversation by the water cooler, just one on one, or, even a handwritten note of some kind. Um, so when you look at appreciation, it really is that recognizing and thanking someone for generating a positive outcome.
And the other side of appreciation, lack of appreciation,
Mhm.
is horribly demotivating for people.
Yes. Yes, 100%. We look at, there's such high disengagement rates in the workplace, right? And they're consistently high. And when we look at one of the main reasons why people leave their job, it's because they don't feel appreciated at work. They don't feel like what they're doing makes a difference, that it matters, that other people are recognizing their efforts. And so they leave.
Inspiring. What's involved in inspiring?
So, inspiring is the ability for a leader to help people understand what the direction is and how they're going to get there. So, oftentimes I would hear something like when I did the research, well, we have a good team, but we didn't know where we were going. And so nobody was really clear on what the goal was, what the roles were, who was doing what, how we were going to get there, how that was going to be measured. There wasn't a lot of vision or direction provided. And so inspiring is really around how do you motivate people and bring them around a common goal to help them get to where you need to go as a group, as a collective. And so, inspiring in that chapter talks about how do you create a vision, right? How do you get people to go be, supportive of that vision? And then how do you help them get to where they need to go?
And even if you have a vision, I think you have to break it down into much smaller pieces because a vision's terrific, but day to day or week to week, what inspires you? What motivates you? What holds this group together cohesively?
Right, right. And when there isn't a vision or a direction or a mission, it's really hard to get people to work together towards a common goal because there isn't one.
No, very true. I mean, on the one hand, you think, "Oh, this is obvious," but it's not. It's not obvious at all if you look at the way we all behave.
Exactly, exactly. Because each person has different motivators, right?
Yeah.
Each person has different reasons for why they're showing up at work each day. Um, and so you need that higher level order of gathering people and rallying them around a common cause or a common goal and objective to help them work together and create that culture of performance and where everyone supports one another to get to the desired outcome.
The last part of your methodology involves seeing. What's
Mhm.
involved in seeing?
So, seeing, like we talked about with hearing, there's a couple dimensions of seeing. So, there's the physical act of just simply seeing someone in front of you, assuming that you have normal eyesight and vision. Um, and there's the other seeing, which is more figurative, right? And that happens at like a deeper level. So, when you're talking about like, I see you, right? And I use the example from Avatar. If you saw the movie, the original Avatar, where Jake and I think it's Natiri, how you pronounce it, they meet each other and they say that the greeting in the Navi language to say hello is actually it's translated as I see you, right? So there's that physical meaning to it, but there's also a figurative meaning to it where they see who the person is at their core. They see what the values are of that person. They see what makes them that beautiful, amazing, unique individual that has these wonderful human qualities. And so seeing means recognizing and appreciating who they are as a human being, and what they stand for and what their values are, and what's important to them. And seeing that whole dimension of the person rather than, oh, you're an employee, that's your title. I see you as just somebody who's doing this job and giving me this deliverable.
Blending a personal why with a corporate why is I think it's difficult. And
Yeah.
I think what you have to do, I'm guessing, is dig to find those common emotional elements that drive people. Because ultimately, you're talking about energy, you're talking about emotions. We're not talking about something that's cut and dried.
No, not at all. And it's sometimes harder for people, to operate on this end of the spectrum because these skills that require the human element, the human and relational skills, they're the hardest to measure and master.
I think they're
And
I don't know that you can measure them, and mastery is a process. As you go on, hopefully you learn from every interaction, so you handle the next one a little bit better, you're a little more thoughtful, you listen a little better. It's an ongoing process, and so often, I think in the society, we're so externally oriented that we fail to develop ourselves within. And that's really what your book is about to some degree,
yeah,
is developing yourself within and the benefit it has for everyone around you.
mhm. Yes, you're exactly right. And the way that I set up the book was very intentional. So, we often hear that like leaders, their job is to lead other people. Um, but if I've learned anything, over the course of my career, it's that you have to lead yourself first
Yeah.
before anyone else will follow you. And if you're not doing a good job leading yourself first, you probably won't have any followers. And so the book is really set up to help you, first of all, learn how to lead yourself. And if you're already doing that, learn how to do it even better. And then once you're proficient with that, then the book is set up to teach you how to lead others, which is the humans framework. And then you have leading the business, which is the final part of the book with your human leader action plan. So there's different steps within the book that you take, and it's got different activities and different actions that you can test and iterate and try. There's also a human leader index that you can take to see where do you fall on each of these dimensions that we've talked about, the six dimensions of the humans framework. And I included a seventh one there, which is called relationships, because it's actually relationships that power the humans framework, that give it the energy and the glue to hold everything together.
Where can people find you?
Mhm. So people can find me online on pretty much any social media channel. They can also find me at my website, which is drjennifernash.com. That's drjennifernash.com. And they can find the book Be Human, Lead Human wherever they choose to purchase their books.